3:00 in the morning. My grandson collapsed at my doorstep. His ribs were bruised and his eye was blackened. Trembling, he confessed, "My wife attacked me because of her lover. I held him in silence. I helped him inside, and without a word, I put on my judge's robe. Ready, I organized my files. Then I dialed my court reporter's number. Start documenting now. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my justice story from. I want to know how far it has reached." I had just finished my evening tea and settled into my reading chair, my bifocals sliding down my nose. After a long, exhausting day, being a retired district judge in this town wasn't always about courtroom drama. But that day I had been mediating a property dispute and reviewing case files until the late hours. My body felt heavy. I just wanted to rest deeply. Outside on the avenue, the howling of neighborhood dogs mixed with the hum of late-night delivery vans racing by. It was already 3:00 in the morning, but the city refused to sleep. I figured the night workers were at the 24-hour diner on the corner, chatting over coffee and pastries like every night. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the sounds so my mind could rest. Suddenly, urgent pounding sounded at the door so loud it made me jump. My heart raced, and my judicial instincts kicked in immediately. Who could be knocking like that at this hour? I walked quickly to the entrance, gripping my cane tightly just in case. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice a little shaky, not from fear, but because I felt something terrible was happening. No one answered. There were just a couple more knocks, weaker, this time followed by a choked, trembling voice. "Grandma, open up, please." I almost froze. It was the voice of David, my grandson. I unlocked the door in a hurry, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I opened it, David collapsed into my arms, trembling like a wounded animal. I hugged him tightly, feeling his limp body as if he didn't have an ounce of energy left. "David, what happened to you, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice breaking. The yellow porch light hit his face, and I was paralyzed by what I saw. His eye was blackened and swollen, barely able to open. His lip was split with dried blood at the corner. He was clutching his ribs with his hands, as if trying to hide unbearable pain. "My wife, she attacked me because of her lover," David whispered. His voice choked before breaking into heartbreaking sobs. I felt my blood boil, but at the same time, my heart broke. My grandson, the one I raised after his mother passed, the one I loved more than my own life, was in front of me. Shattered, I helped him inside. I laid him on the sofa and ran to the bathroom for a damp cloth and the first aid kit. "Stay still, sweetheart. Let me see," I said, trying to stay calm, although inside I was a wreck. I carefully cleaned the blood from his lip, but it kept seeping red and raw as if it were cutting my own heart. The cut was deep. It wasn't just a skin wound. It seemed to carry a much deeper damage. David kept clutching his ribs, his thin hands shaking. Carefully, I removed his hands. I lifted his shirt, and oh my God, I nearly dropped the cloth. A massive bruise, black and purple, covered his ribcage, as if he had been struck not once, but many times, viciously. I felt like I couldn't breathe, as if I had taken the blows myself. "David, who did this to you?" "It was Jessica, wasn't it?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage and pain. David didn't answer. He just cried, and his sobs broke the silence of the house. Without another thought, I grabbed the phone and dialed the number I knew by heart, the town's emergency room. "Dr. Harrison, please get ready. I'm bringing my grandson over," I said, hurrying. My car was at the shop getting the brakes fixed, so I called a taxi. While we waited, I sat next to David. I covered him with a blanket so he wouldn't be cold. His cell phone, which he had left on the table, wouldn't stop lighting up. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 8 missed calls from Jessica and some messages that appeared on the lock screen. "Say one word and you'll lose the car." I felt the blood rush to my head. I reached out to grab the phone. I wanted to see more, to know what else she had done to him. But David, though weak, snatched it from me in a panic. "Grandma, don't look. It's nothing." He looked at me with eyes full of fear, as if just touching that phone would make everything fall apart. I didn't press him. I just squeezed his hand to calm him down. "I'm here, sweetheart. Nothing is going to happen to you." But inside, I knew this had already gone too far. When the taxi arrived, I helped David get in. supporting him with one arm while clumsily carrying a bag with the other. On the way to the hospital, David was hunched over, his head resting on my shoulder, repeating over and over, "Forgive me, Grandma. I didn't want to bother you at this hour, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to run here." Every word he said was like a stab in my heart. I was his grandmother. I had promised to protect him all his life, and now he had to come find me in the middle of the night, broken by the woman I once trusted. The taxi stopped in front of the hospital, where the cold white light of a neon sign illuminated the words "emergency room." I helped David get out my grandson, who could barely stand. His body was still shaking, and he was clutching his ribs as if holding on to his last bit of strength. I squeezed his hand, trying to hide how my own heart was racing. "I'm here. Don't be afraid," I whispered, though I was terrified too. Dr. Mitchell Harrison, who was on duty, was already waiting for us at the door. He looked at David, then at me with a worried expression, but said nothing. He just motioned for a nurse to take my grandson to an examination room. I followed, my feet feeling as heavy as lead. When the nurse removed David's thin jacket, I almost gasped. Besides the bruises on his face, his shoulders and wrists were covered in marks of cruelty, purple and reddish bruises like silent accusations. I stood there, motionless, holding on to the edge of a table, containing the rage that was burning inside me. What did this monster do to you, I thought, but I didn't dare say it out loud for fear that David would start crying again. Dr. Harrison carefully noted each injury, his face serious. "We need to do an X-ray to see if he has any fractured ribs," he said, his voice grave but firm. I nodded without saying anything, just watching David lie there, his eyes closed as if trying to escape reality. While I waited for the results, I went down to reception to sign his treatment papers and pay a deposit. My cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating. An unknown number appeared on the screen. I recognized it immediately. If someone was calling at this hour, right after David arrived at my house, it could only be Jessica. Rage surged through me, and I hung up without even answering. She didn't deserve to talk to me, not after what she had done. When I returned to the room, David had fallen into a light sleep, probably from exhaustion. I pulled the blanket up, my hands still shaking. Seeing his face, I remembered the David from before, the cheerful young man who used to help me in the garden, shouting, "Grandma, watch this." Now that smile was gone, replaced by wounds and fear. I sat by the bed, watching him sleep, my heart in pieces. I was his grandmother. I had promised to protect him, and I had let him fall into the hands of a woman like Jessica. I blamed myself, but at the same time, a flame of determination began to burn within me. I couldn't let my grandson continue to suffer. Never again. After they put him on Enrollment 4 and he was stable, I took David home. I made him a glass of warm milk, left it by his bed, and closed the door quietly, making sure he was asleep. It was almost dawn. A faint light filtered through the window. I went out to the balcony to tidy up a bit, and I saw Mrs. Patel, the neighbor, across the street, sweeping her yard. When she saw me, she hurried over. Her voice rushed. "Did something happen at your house last night, Mary?" I heard knocking on the door and some crying. I sighed and briefly told her that David had been beaten by his wife, that she had kicked him out of the house, and he had to take refuge here in the middle of the night. Mrs. Patel gritted her teeth, her eyes flashing. How dare she treat her husband like that? That woman has no shame. I nodded, saying no more, but I felt I had an ally. Suddenly, I remembered that Mrs. Patel had a camera at her entrance. "Hey, Mrs. Patel, could your camera have recorded anything last night?" I asked. She nodded immediately, opened the app on her phone, and showed me the video. I recorded the scene on my phone, David at my door, knocking desperately, his faint cries echoing in the night. Seeing that image made my heart ache all over again, but at the same time, I knew it would be a key piece of evidence. I took Mrs. Patel's hand and thanked her from the bottom of my soul. She just patted my hand and said firmly, "Don't forget to get justice for that boy. I trust you can do it." I went into my bedroom, opened the closet, and looked at my judge's robe, hanging impeccably, the black robe, the white collar, the gavel display case. Everything seemed to be waiting for me. I took the robe, feeling the heavy fabric under my fingers. In silence, I put it on, adjusting each fold. Each movement was like an oath. I was not only David's grandmother, I was also a retired district judge, and I would use everything I had to protect him. When I finished, I picked up the phone and dialed Patricia Lynch, the court reporter I'd worked with for 30 years. Her voice sounded sleepy on the other end. "Hello." I was brief. "Patricia, start documenting right now." She was silent for a moment, then asked, "Mary, are you sure?" I answered without a second of hesitation. "Completely." "Get ready." I hung up and went to the living room. I took my digital camera out of a drawer. I approached the bed where David was sleeping, carefully removed the blanket, and started photographing each of his injuries. The blackened eye, the split lip, the bruise on his ribcage. Every time the flash went off, I felt I was not only documenting the physical wounds, but also the deep damage to his soul. When I finished, I sat at the dining room table and spread out all the papers and the USB drive with the video from Mrs. Patel's house. I connected the drive to my laptop and carefully backed everything up. Sitting there, watching the screen light up, I knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. I had entered a war not just for David, but for the justice I had sworn to uphold. By the time I finished backing up the video from Mrs. Patel's camera, the clock read 9:00 in the morning. David was still fast asleep in bed, his face swollen and his lips dry and cracked, as if he couldn't escape the pain even in his dreams. I quietly went into the kitchen and made a bowl of chicken noodle soup. The smell of celery and herbs filled the air. I brought the tray to his bed and woke him up gently. He opened his eyes, his gaze tired, and was surprised to see me there dressed in my judge's robe. "Grandma," he murmured, then shook his head. "I'm not hungry." I sat beside him, trying to make my voice as gentle as possible. "To be strong and move forward, you have to eat." David looked at me, his eyes watery, and reluctantly took the spoon, swallowing with difficulty. Seeing him like this squeezed my heart. Just a few years ago, David was a radiant young man, always smiling, filling the house with joy. Now he was here, broken a shadow of his former self. I decided to take him back to the hospital for another checkup. The bruise on his ribcage worried me. Dr. Mitchell Harrison received us in the emergency room, his face serious but without saying much. He ordered a CT scan to make sure there was no internal bleeding. While we waited for the results, I sat in the waiting room, took out my laptop, and connected the USB drive. The video appeared on the screen. At 3:07 in the morning, David was at my front door, knocking desperately, his muffled sobs echoing through the microphone. Seeing that image made my heart ache again, as if I were reliving that night. I copied the video to an external hard drive and password protected it, taking care of every detail. I knew what I was doing was not just to protect David, but to build a wall of evidence against Jessica. Just then, David's cell phone rang. The screen read Jessica Torres. I felt my heart stop. I grabbed the phone before David could react and turned it off immediately. David looked at me, terrified. "Grandma, if she finds out I talked, she won't leave me alone." His voice trembled as if the mere mention of her name plunged him into darkness. I squeezed his hand tightly, trying to calm him. "I'm here, sweetheart. Nothing is going to happen to you." But I said no more. I just looked at the clock in silence. It was almost 11:00 in the morning. I took the SIM card out of David's phone and put in another one I had ready. I didn't want her to find him. I didn't want her to have the chance to threaten him again. The CT scan results came back a few minutes later, confirming that David had several severe soft tissue contusions, but luckily no internal bleeding. I let out a breath, but the relief was momentary. The wounds on David's body would heal, but the ones in his soul I knew would need much more time. I took him home and called Patricia Lynch, the court reporter. "I have the medical records and the video from the neighbor's camera," I told her bluntly. She scheduled a meeting at her office in the afternoon to gather the evidence. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patel came over with a pot of still hot chicken soup. "This is for David to get his strength back," she said with her warm voice. "If you need a witness, count on me." I looked at her, feeling her sincere support, and my heart felt a little stronger. In the afternoon, David tried to rest, but he would wake up startled from nightmares. I sat by his side, trying to calm him, but he just babbled fearfully. Jessica pushed me, and Brandon, he was in the corner laughing at me. Hearing that, I felt the blood rush to my head. "Who is Brandon?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. David told me in a weak voice that Brandon was Jessica's lover, that he had come to their house several times, shamelessly, showing off, provoking Jessica to take it out on him. His story was like a knife in my heart. I had eaten at the same table as Jessica. I had thought she was a decent woman who would take care of my grandson, and now it turned out she was not only cheating on him, but letting another man humiliate him in his own home. Sitting by the bed, I took out my cell phone and took close-up pictures of the bruises on David's wrists, including his watch to show the exact time. With every picture I took, I felt I was not only documenting the physical wounds, but also the pain my grandson carried. I knew these photos would be evidence, but they were also a reminder of what I had to do to protect him. In the afternoon, I took David to Patricia's office with a portfolio containing all the evidence. I had gathered the photos of the injuries, the medical report, and the video on the USB. Patricia opened it and laid everything on the table. The photos of the injuries, the medical report, and the video on the USB. Patricia nodded, her voice firm. This is a pretty solid foundation. Now we just need to prove public adultery, and she'll have nowhere to run. I gripped the handle of my briefcase, knowing perfectly well what my next step was. I was no longer just a grieving grandmother. I was a retired judge, and I would use everything I had to make Jessica pay. That night, I didn't take David to my house. I didn't want him to be in a place where Jessica could find him. Instead, I left him at Mrs. Patel's house, my trusted neighbor. She opened her doors for him to stay the night and promised to keep a close eye on him. I returned home alone, my heart heavy. I removed my judge's robe and put on an old cardigan and jeans, trying to look like an ordinary person and not a judge looking for evidence. I took the digital camera out of the drawer, checked the battery and memory card, and left in my old sedan. Every turn of the tires reminded me that I was entering a war not just for David, but for the justice I had sworn to uphold. I parked the car in a dark alley near the Velvet Lounge, the place David had told me Jessica frequented. The neon light from the place lit up a piece of the street. I sat in the car, hunched down, camera in hand, waiting. Around 9:00 p.m., Jessica's white SUV appeared, its headlights sweeping the alley. My heart raced, but I remained calm and turned on the camera. Ready? A few minutes later, a man came out from the corner. He was wearing a tight black shirt, his hair slicked back, and a cigarette in his hand. He walked with a provocative confidence. I recognized him immediately. It was Brandon Kane, the man David had told me about Jessica's lover, the one who had made my grandson suffer. Jessica turned off the engine, got out, and opened the door for Brandon, wrapping her arm around his waist with familiarity. Seeing her, I felt my blood boil. She, the one who had sat down to eat in my house, the one who had called me Grandma Mary, was now embracing another man, while my grandson was in a bed full of bruises. I snapped picture after picture. The neon light from the lounge clearly illuminated their faces. Each photo was like a stab, but also another piece in the puzzle I was putting together to unmask her. I followed them from a distance to a small motel with a flashing red light sign. I didn't get close, just stayed far away and took a couple more photos of them entering the lobby hand in hand. Then I went around to the parking lot and took a picture of Jessica's SUV license plate, making sure a nearby digital clock showed the time. Each photo was a bullet, and I knew I had what would leave her with no escape. When I got home, I opened my laptop and moved all the photos to a special password-protected folder. I called Patricia, the court reporter, with a determination I couldn't hide. I have the photos of her infidelity. You can see their faces. You can see the car's license plate. Patricia responded with a firm voice. Excellent, Mary. Keep them safe. Don't let her know you have them. I nodded, although she couldn't see me, feeling a little more relieved, knowing I was one step closer to justice. Just then, my cell phone vibrated. It was David calling from Mrs. Patel's number. His voice sounded distressed. Grandma, she just called a friend of mine to ask where I am. When he told her he didn't know, she threatened him too. I'm so scared. Hearing David, I felt my heart shrink. My grandson, even though he had escaped, was still tormented by her threats. I reassured him. You stay calm. Stay at Mrs. Patel's house. I have her under surveillance. But inside, I knew I had to act faster before she found a way to hurt David again. I immediately contacted Lieutenant Morrison, a trusted colleague at the prosecutor's office. I presented him with all the evidence I had gathered, the video from Mrs. Patel, David's medical history, and the photos of the infidelity. I need you to send a patrol to watch the neighborhood, especially Mrs. Patel's house, I said, my voice hard. Morrison agreed without hesitation, but not without warning me first. Mary, what you're doing is very dangerous, but if you have enough evidence, I'm sure you'll win. I thanked him and gave him a copy of the infidelity photos in case something happened to me. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I sat at the dining room table, organizing all the data into files, proof of the injuries, the camera video, and the photos of the infidelity. Each file was like an accusation, one more step to bring Jessica to light. But in my heart, I couldn't shake the pain. I had once considered her a granddaughter-in-law. I had believed she would protect David. And now, not only had she betrayed him, but she had dared to raise a hand to him, to threaten him, all for another man. That pain, like a deep cut, hurt me every time I thought about David's bruises. The next morning, I took David to Dr. Helen Rodriguez, a psychologist Patricia had recommended. David needed help to overcome the trauma of the months of abuse. I stayed in the waiting room, my heart heavy, watching my grandson walk into the office. Walking slowly with his shoulders slumped was like a stone in my chest. I, who thought I was a strong grandmother, a tough retired judge, had not been able to protect him from the woman I trusted. That pain, like a deep cut, hurt me every time I remembered David's bruised face. While I was sitting there, my phone vibrated. It was Leonard Foster, the head of the county clerk's office, whom I knew from some previous cases. His voice sounded grave and a bit rushed. Judge Thornton, it's not wise to talk much on the phone, but I just saw your name and your grandson's on a vehicle title transfer file. Something strange. If you have time, you should come by. I frowned, not understanding what he was talking about. David and I hadn't done any transfer paperwork, but a bad feeling made me get up immediately. I told Dr. Rodriguez I would be back for David later. When I arrived at the county clerk's office, Leonard motioned for me to enter his office. He opened a file. Frowning, there's something strange here. This vehicle was transferred to a Brandon Kane last week, but since you didn't call me to confirm, I found it odd. I froze. I felt my blood run cold. It can't be, I exclaimed. My voice choked. David and I never signed anything. Leonard shook his head and handed me the file. The signatures are here with your name and your grandson's, and the transaction is already filed. I immediately asked, I took the paper who came to deliver these signatures that looked nothing like ours. Leonard replied in a low voice. The clerk told me it was your grandson's wife, Jessica. She said you had asked her to handle it because you were occupied with legal work. Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. Jessica had not only attacked David, not only cheated on him, but she had dared to forge our signatures to steal the vehicle, my late husband's legacy, what my family had cared for years. I tried to stay calm and asked Leonard for a photocopy of the file. He sighed. Someone from inside here surely helped her with the paperwork. Before I left, he whispered, Mary, this is dangerous. Be careful that no one in the office knows I told you. I nodded, thanked him, and promised not to betray him. But inside, I felt like I was walking on thin ice. Jessica wasn't just a violent woman, she was a manipulator, willing to do anything to get her way. In the afternoon, I went to pick up David from his therapy. He looked tired, but his gaze was no longer one of panic. I took him directly to Patricia Lynch's office with the photocopy of the forged papers. Patricia reviewed them carefully, tapping the table with her fingers, and said firmly, "This is the final nail in the coffin. Now we also have proof of fraud enough for her to have no escape." David, sitting next to me, listened in silence, but his eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, she dared to forge the signatures to steal Grandpa's car," he said with a trembling voice, both pained and indignant. I took his hand and squeezed it, trying to give him some strength, but I was also fighting my own pain. That vehicle wasn't just property, it was a memory. It was my husband's pride, something our family had cared for generations, and Jessica had dared to trample all over it just for her ambition and her betrayal. That night, I met with Lieutenant Morrison and gave him the copy of the fake papers. He nodded, his gaze serious. "Your evidence is very solid. I assure you, she won't get away." I thanked him, but I still had a weight on my heart. When I got home, I locked all the documents in the small safe in my bedroom. The clock showed almost midnight, but I wasn't sleepy at all. I sat in the dark, thinking about Jessica, about what she had done to David, to our family. That pain, like a slow fire, burned and drove me at the same time. I knew the time had come to face her directly. There was no other option. On Thursday morning, I left David at Mrs. Patel's house, the safest place for him at that moment. Lieutenant Morrison had someone watching outside, and I knew he would be protected, but my heart was not at ease. I put on civilian clothes, an old cardigan and slacks, but I hid a file in my bag with the evidence I had carefully prepared. The photos of David's injuries, the video from the neighbor's camera, the hospital report, and the photocopy of the fake vehicle papers. I drove my sedan to Jessica's marketing firm, the place where she conducted her business and flaunted her power in town. Every turn of the tires reminded me that this wasn't a simple trip, but an inevitable confrontation. The office was open. A smell of fresh coffee and expensive perfume hit me in the face. Two of Jessica's colleagues were arranging files on the desks and gave me a sideways glance when I entered. One of them smiled mockingly. "Look, the grandmother-in-law arrived." I ignored them and walked straight to the back office where Jessica was sitting, reviewing marketing plans with stacks of glossy brochures piled on a glass desk. She looked up and gave a fake smile. "What's up, Grandma Mary? Are you so unoccupied that you have time to visit your granddaughter-in-law?" Her voice was loaded with sarcasm, but I paid her no mind. I hadn't come to argue or chat. I put the file on her desk. Each page was like an accusation: the photos of David's bruises, the video from Mrs. Patel's camera with my grandson's cries in the early morning, the hospital report detailing his injuries, and the photocopy of the forged papers she had dared to sign for me and for David. Jessica glanced at them. Her face changed for an instant, but she quickly regained her air of confidence, hiding it with a contemptuous smile. "And what about these little papers? I have better lawyers than you." I looked her in the eyes, my voice cold. "I didn't come to argue with you. If you want to see who's right, we'll see each other in court." She jumped up, her voice restrained as if I had touched her pride. "Who's going to dare to touch me? Who's going to stand against me in this town?" I didn't flinch. I looked her straight in her arrogant eyes. "I will. Don't think everyone is afraid of you." The two colleagues at the entrance tried to approach, but I took my retired judge's badge out of my jacket pocket and held it up. They stopped dead in their tracks, their gazes evasive. Jessica turned red, slammed the table hard, and almost shouted, "Your grandson is pathetic. He deserved to be disciplined, and don't think that badge will always save you." Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. She dared to say that David, my grandson, whom I loved more than my life, deserved to be disciplined. She dared to justify the bruises, the night David had to flee in pain. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to lunge at her and grab her by the collar. But I held back. I didn't answer, just collected the file in silence, put it in my bag, and turned to leave. Before I left, I turned back and said firmly, "Just so you're clear, from now on, the rules of the game have changed. It's not you who's going to discipline anyone. It's the law that's going to discipline you." Jessica shouted at my back, "If you walk out that door, you stop being my grandmother-in-law, and then don't complain if I get nasty." I stopped, looked at her one last time without a hint of fear. "Well, consider that from now on, you are no longer my grandson's wife." I went out into the street, where the wind was kicking up dust from the sidewalk. I got in the car and immediately called Patricia. "It's time to file the lawsuit." Patricia replied, her voice calm but cautious. "All right, get ready. She's going to counterattack with everything she's got." I nodded, though she couldn't see me, my heart as cold as steel. I knew this war wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. A few days after my confrontation with Jessica at the marketing firm, rumors started spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. Early in the morning, I went to the farmer's market for some vegetables, trying to act normal, but the whispers reached my ears. Two ladies at the corner produce stand were whispering that David probably made it all up. They say he was controlling with his wife, that's why she hit him. I walked past them and they fell silent, but their gazes followed me as if I were the one causing trouble. In the cafe next door, an old man sipped his coffee and shook his head. Mary is now using her judicial connections to screw over her granddaughter-in-law. Hearing that felt like a dagger in my chest. These people who greeted me every morning, who smiled at David when he was a child, now so easily believed Jessica's lies. I lowered my head and quickened my pace, trying not to let them see my eyes welling up with tears. At noon, Patricia called me to her office. She placed a stack of papers in front of me, her voice grave. Jessica just hired Vincent Caldwell, a high-profile attorney from Atlanta. He filed a counterclaim. He says David made everything up to extort her, and that you're abusing your authority as a retired judge. I took the lawsuit and saw Caldwell's signature in blue ink, still fresh. The words on the paper were like direct accusations against David and me, as if we were the villains, the ones trying to ruin Jessica's life. David, sitting next to me, turned pale and said with a trembling voice, "Grandma, she wants to make me out to be a liar." Seeing him, I felt my heart clench. David, my sweet grandson, now had to endure not only the bruises on his body, but also the slander of the woman he once loved. I took his hand and squeezed it, trying to give him some strength, but inside, I felt an indescribable pain. I had thought this town where I was born and raised would be on our side, but now it seemed the whole world was turning its back on us. In the afternoon, I took David to Mrs. Patel's house. As we passed through an alley, I saw Jessica's two colleagues standing there smoking, staring at us. One of them lifted her chin and said sarcastically, "Be careful. People around here believe Jessica more than you." I didn't answer, just squeezed David's hand and got him into the house. But those words were like stones thrown at my heart, making me feel more alone than ever. I immediately called Morrison to inform him of the threat. He promised to reinforce patrols at night, but his voice also sounded worried. "Mary, be careful. That woman is trying everything to turn the situation around." I nodded and thanked him, but inside, I knew I was walking a very dangerous path. That night, I went to the corner pharmacy to buy something for David's pain. The pharmacist, an acquaintance of many years, took me to a corner and whispered, "Mary, be careful. People are saying all over that you made everything up to take the car from your granddaughter-in-law." Hearing that, a chill ran down my spine. The people who had been my neighbors, with whom I had shared stories, now believed I was a schemer. I thanked her, tried to smile, but as I left the pharmacy, I felt the world was caving in on me. When I got home, I found an unmarked envelope slipped under the door. Inside, a note in scribbled handwriting, "Shut up or you lose your grandson." I took the paper. My hands trembled, but not from fear. I was furious. Furious because Jessica dared to threaten my grandson. Furious because the people around me were so easily manipulated. I carefully filed the note in the evidence file, knowing it would be another piece to unmask her. Late at night, I had an emergency meeting with Patricia at her office. She saw the threatening note and nodded slightly. "Good. The dirtier she plays, the more she tangles herself up. But public opinion is on her side. We need a strong blow to change things. And the only one who can do that is Brandon." Hearing Patricia mention Brandon, I felt a small light of hope ignite in the darkness. Brandon, Jessica's lover, could be the key to turning the situation around. But at the same time, I knew bringing him to our side wouldn't be easy. I stood there in the dim light of the office, thinking about David, about the bruises on his body, about the lies that were suffocating us. That pain, like a slow fire, burned and drove me at the same time. I wasn't going to let Jessica win. I wasn't going to let her lies hide the truth. The day after the tense confrontation at the marketing firm, I found out that Brandon used to frequent a small sports bar at the end of Maple Street. I knew it was my chance to change the course of the game, to turn the tables on the hand Jessica thought she had won. I put on a nondescript jacket and a baseball cap, trying to go unnoticed. When I entered the place, classic rock music was blasting. Cigarette smoke hung in the air, and the smell of beer and fried food mixed in the atmosphere. I chose a booth in a dark corner, sat down, and kept my eyes on the door. I didn't want to be recognized. I didn't want any of Jessica's people to see me before I could talk to Brandon. Around 10:30 at night, he appeared in a fitted leather jacket, his hair slicked back, and a beer bottle in his hand. He walked with a confidence that seemed forced. I looked at him and felt a mix of anger and calculation. This was the man who had contributed to my grandson's suffering. But at the same time, I knew he was also just a pawn in Jessica's game. I took a deep breath, got up, and sat across from him. Brandon raised an eyebrow, his voice defensive. "And who are you?" I didn't answer right away, just placed an envelope on the table in silence. Inside was a copy of the fake vehicle papers Jessica had schemed, along with a bank statement for Brandon full of accumulated debts and the risk of foreclosure. I looked him in the eyes and said sharply, "I'm David's grandmother. If you stay on her side, you'll go down with her. But if you cooperate, you'll save yourself." Brandon let out a mocking laugh, but it vanished from his face as soon as he opened the envelope and saw the papers. He turned pale. His gaze faltered as he saw the forged signature on the transfer and the red numbers of his debts. I continued in a cold but firm voice. "The district attorney already knows everything. As soon as the trial starts, you'll be called to testify for fraud, and you could even face serious charges. Is that what you want?" Brandon was quiet for a long time. The hand holding his beer bottle was trembling. He downed his drink in one gulp, as if to give himself courage, and then said in a shaky voice, "Jessica promised me she'd give me a share of the vehicle sale. She said everything would be fine, that I would have it all. But now I understand she just used me." Hearing him, I felt a bit of pity. Brandon, though misguided, was another victim of Jessica's manipulation. But I didn't let my emotions get the best of me. I looked at him intently. "You have one last chance to get out of this clean. Tell the truth at the trial, I will take that into account." Just then, the bar door swung open and Jessica's two colleagues walked in. They looked around, and their eyes locked on me sitting with Brandon. They approached with unfriendly faces. Without hesitation, I took my retired judge's badge out of my pocket and placed it on the table. "Want to try something? Go ahead." The dim light of the place shone on the badge, and the two women stopped, slowly backing towards the door, their eyes still full of hatred. Brandon was breathing heavily, pale as a sheet, clinging to the edge of the table. I looked at him and said in a grave but determined voice, "Say, Jessica can't protect you. She's only going to drag you down with her." Brandon bit his lip, his eyes torn between fear and determination. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I'll testify, but you have to promise me I'll be safe." I didn't promise much, I just nodded. "If you do the right thing, I'll do everything I can." I immediately called Morrison, told him the situation, and asked him to arrange a secure location on the outskirts for Brandon to hide in. Leaving the bars, I walked down the cold, dark street, the wind making me shiver. But inside, I felt a great relief. I knew the battle had turned. Jessica had just lost her most important piece. The morning of the trial, I woke up at 6:00 when the sky was still dim. I went to the kitchen and made a light oatmeal breakfast. The gentle aroma seemed to want to calm the tension that filled the house. I brought the tray to the bed where David was still sleeping. Seeing him there, his face still a little swollen, and his eye tender squeezed my heart. I woke him gently, whispering, "Eat something, sweetheart, so you'll have strength." David opened his eyes, his gaze tired, but he nodded and sat up slowly. I helped him put on a crisp white shirt and khaki slacks and straightened his collar to give him confidence. I fixed his hair and said softly, "You don't have to hang your head anymore." David looked at me, his eyes watery, but he didn't say anything, just took my hand, as if it were the only way to feel safe. Outside the house, Lieutenant Morrison was already waiting for us with an unmarked police car. He greeted me with a nod, his look serious but warm. "I've arranged protection. Mary, everything will be fine today," he said. I thanked him, feeling a bit of relief knowing I wasn't alone. On the way to the courthouse, I saw the townspeople gathered in the square, whispering. Some looked at us with curiosity, others nodded slightly as if in support, but there were also those who shook their heads with mistrust. The rumors Jessica had spread still hung in the air, and I knew that today's battle wasn't just against her, but to reclaim the truth. Arriving at the courthouse entrance, I saw Jessica. She was standing there in an impeccable navy suit, her face composed and her gaze sharp as a blade. Beside her, the attorney Caldwell seemed calm, but I knew he was tense. Brandon was there too, standing far from Jessica, his arms crossed and his gaze distant. Seeing him, I remembered the night at the bar when I convinced him to switch sides, and I felt a spark of hope. But I knew today wouldn't be easy. I took David's hand and led him into the courtroom. Inside, the place was packed. The old wooden benches creaked as people settled in. I saw Mrs. Patel in the back row. She nodded at me encouragingly, as if to say she would always be there supporting us. Judge Harold Stevens entered, and the whole room stood up. The air felt thick. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning, like the heartbeat of the room. Patricia Lynch, my court reporter turned legal consultant, began. Her voice was deep and confident. She presented the case. Each piece of evidence was laid out before the court, the photos of David's injuries, Dr. Harrison's report detailing the lesions, the video from Mrs. Patel's camera that recorded David's cries in the early morning, and the copy of the forged vehicle papers that Leonard Foster had provided us. When Patricia projected the video on the screen, David's knocks on the door and his faint sobs filled the room. I heard murmurs among the people. Some were wiping their eyes. I looked at David beside me. His hands were shaking and his head was bowed. I put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed it gently, as if to tell him I was still there, that I would always be there. Attorney Caldwell rose to rebut. His voice was sharp. David invented everything to extort my client. Mary Thornton abused her authority as a retired judge to coerce and slander. Those words were like daggers in my heart. I wanted to jump up, to scream that he was lying, that David's bruises were not an invention. But Patricia signaled for me to calm down. She presented Jessica's threatening messages, which were clearly visible on the big screen. Say one word and you'll lose the car. The room fell silent. David bowed his head. His hands trembled more violently, and I knew he was remembering the months he lived in fear. I squeezed his shoulder, trying to give him some of my strength. Then it was Brandon's turn. He took the stand, trembling, his gaze hesitant. Jessica promised to give me a share of the vehicle sale, he said, his voice shaky but clear. She pressured me to accept the transfer papers, saying everything was arranged. But the truth is, she forged her husband's signature to steal the vehicle from him. Jessica jumped up, shouting, "You betrayed me." The court guards had to force her to sit down, while Judge Stevens said sternly, "Order, or I will have you removed from the courtroom." Brandon bowed his head but continued to testify. Each word was like a hammer shattering Jessica's lies. Seeing him, I felt a little relief, but I couldn't help the pain in my heart. Brandon had been part of David's suffering, but now he had chosen to be on the side of the truth. When it was my turn, I took the stand and swore before the court. I looked directly at the people, my voice firm. I am a retired district judge, but today I am here as a grandmother. I will not allow anyone, not even my grandson's wife, to destroy my grandson and mock the law. I pointed at Jessica without a trace of fear in my eyes. That woman is not a wife. She is not a partner. She is just an abuser and a liar. The whole room murmured. Some of the people who had believed in Jessica looked at each other, confused. I saw Mrs. Patel's gaze. She nodded as if telling me I had done the right thing. Finally, Judge Stevens stood up to read the verdict. His voice was grave and clear, but I didn't hear every word. I only knew that he issued a protection order for David, froze all of Jessica's assets, nullified the vehicle transfer, and sent the case to the state attorney's office to investigate the crimes of fraud and domestic violence. A roar of murmurs filled the room. Jessica slumped in her chair, her face pale, as if all her strength had vanished. Caldwell remained silent, taking off his glasses to wipe away the sweat. I took David's hand and led him out of there. The midday sun shone brightly on the courthouse steps, and I heard people whispering, "Mary won. Justice won." But inside, I knew that this victory did not erase the wounds David had suffered. I only hoped that from this day on, he could begin to find his smile again. The afternoon of the trial, when Judge Harold Stevens finished reading the verdict, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. I didn't hear every one of his words, but when I saw Jessica collapse in her chair, her face pale, I knew we had won. The ruling dictated a protection order for David, froze Jessica's assets, nullified the fraudulent vehicle transfer, and sent the case to the state attorney's office to investigate the crimes of domestic violence and fraud. When I took David's hand and we left the courthouse, the midday sun was shining on the steps, and I heard people whisper, "Mary won. Justice won." But inside, I didn't feel victorious, I just felt relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But the pain was still there, like a scar that would never fully heal. That same afternoon, the police went to Jessica's marketing firm to arrest her. People crowded the street to watch. Some whistled at her, others shouted insults to her face. I wasn't there, but the next morning, when the local newspaper published a photo of Jessica in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs under the headline "Marketing Executive, arrested for violence and vehicle fraud, I felt something strange. It wasn't joy, it was a kind of liberation. She who had sat at my table, who had called me Grandma Mary, was now paying for what she had done. But that feeling was quickly replaced by sadness. I had trusted her. I had thought she would take care of David. The pain of being betrayed by a family member, like a slow burn, still seared inside me. Brandon disappeared from the town a few days after the trial. It was rumored he had gone to Denver to look for work, to start over. I didn't blame him. He had been part of David's pain, but in the end, he had chosen the truth. Jessica's two colleagues, the ones who called themselves her loyal team, were also questioned for witness tampering. The neighborhood suddenly felt calmer. There were no more hateful glares or silent threats. But I knew that the wounds Jessica had left on David and me wouldn't disappear so easily. David moved in with me permanently. The first few days, he could barely sleep. He would wake up startled every night, sweating, screaming, "Grandma, she's coming." In those moments, I would sit by his side, take his hand, and whisper, "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." But seeing David like that, I saw myself years ago when my husband had passed, and I had to stay strong alone. I took him to Dr. Helen Rodriguez, the psychologist, every week without fail. Dr. Rodriguez listened to David with patience, helping him face his nightmares step by step. After a few weeks, I started to notice a change. David no longer avoided eye contact when he went out. He no longer hung his head when he walked through the farmer's market. One afternoon, I found him in the kitchen making spaghetti, and as he stirred the sauce, he hummed softly. That tune, as gentle as the wind, brought tears to my eyes. It had been so long since I had heard my grandson hum. It was as if the sun was starting to enter the house again. The town also began to change its attitude. The neighbors who had doubted, who had believed Jessica's rumors, now greeted me. Some came up to apologize with regret in their voices. "Judge Thornton, we didn't know the truth." I just nodded without resentment. I understood that Jessica's lies had been convincing, and not everyone has the courage to stand up to someone like her. Mrs. Patel came to visit with a tray of homemade samosas, and she hugged David tightly. "You turned out stronger than I expected." Seeing them laugh together warmed my heart, as if people's kindness still existed despite the dark days. I continued my volunteer work at the legal aid clinic. Every case was a reminder of my duty. Every time I encountered a case of domestic violence, I felt more determined to help other men and women break the silence. Once, I found a young man crying outside the clinic, his eyes red, clutching his backpack. I sat next to him and said in a soft voice, "You're not alone. My grandson lived it, and I too stayed silent once. But today, I know that silence only feeds the monster." The young man looked at me, the tears still streaming, but there was a new glint in his eyes. I knew I couldn't erase his pain, but at least I could show him that someone was willing to listen. A few months later, David felt strong enough to go back to work. He got a job in a financial consulting firm downtown. That night, he came home late, opening the door with a radiant smile. "Grandma, I got the position." I stood up and hugged him with all my might, and we both cried. They weren't tears of pain but of joy, of liberation. Seeing David there, smiling like the sun, reminded me of the young man who used to help me in the garden, calling out, "Grandma, watch this." I knew the wounds in his heart were still there, but he was learning to move on, to find himself again. That night, I sat on the balcony. The wind was blowing coolly. I remembered the night David collapsed at my door, his face covered in bruises, telling me in a trembling voice what Jessica had done to him. I remembered the months of struggle, the sleepless nights, the moments I thought I would break under the lies and mistrust of the entire town. But then I looked at David's smile today, and I thought, justice is sometimes slow, but when it comes, it can give you back your breath, your laughter, and even your future. I took a sip of my tea. It was cold now, but I felt a peace in my heart that I hadn't felt in a long time. David had come back, and though he carried the scars of the past, he had found a reason to keep fighting not just for himself, but to show others that there is always a way forward. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many men and women are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I'm genuinely curious. If it were you in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all to get your voice back? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the end screen, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.